Good evening and good morning. Welcome to the international launch of the Actineo 2021 survey. Workspaces in major cities, where and how will we work in the post-COVID world? Will nomadism and home working, already observed before the crisis, accelerate? Will it evolve the same way in the large cities around the world? My name is François Brunet. I'm a founder member of Actineo. Tonight, I represent the Actineo collective, which is made up of 20 office furniture manufacturers with presence on the French market. Actineo is a research entity monitoring quality of life at work. It was founded 16 years ago by the industrial members of the French Furniture Manufacturers Association. Actineo's goal is to decipher changes in work lifestyles in order to analyze their impact on the performance of companies and the well-being of employees. For our European audience, please excuse us for scheduling this conference at a late hour. We wanted to cater to as many people as possible, and in particular, to include the 5 cities that are part of our survey. Our apologies to our friends in Singapore, for whom it is midnight, but who will be able to watch the replay at a more convenient time. The results of the survey will shortly be presented by Marilyn Nguyen, Senior Consultant at Sociovision, who led the study and whom I thank for the quality and relevance of her analysis. During Marilyn's presentation, 2 witnesses will react and bring their American and European perspective. Kate North, Vice President, Workspace Advisory in the USA for Colliers, Janja Bokart, who is Dutch and lives in London and manages the EMEA area for Colliers. Finally, I would like to thank our partners without whom we would not have been able to carry out such an ambitious study. Maison Objet, a major international trade fair, but also a community of the world of design and art of living. Thank you, Philippe Brocard. Maison Objet have also just announced a new date for work. The lab for the new art of working anywhere will be held from the 9th to the 13th of September. Colliers France, and particularly Frédéric Myriel, head of workplace consulting, change management, and R&D, who agreed to share this great adventure with us, and not forgetting the unfailing support of the French furniture industry and its development committee. Before handing over to Marilyn, a few practical details. You can ask your questions in the chat and in the Q&A throughout the conference. Our 3 speakers who are live with us will be happy to answer your questions after the presentation. The presentation of the study will be online on the actineo.fr website after the conference, and the replay of the conference will be on the Actineo website tomorrow on 5th of May. Marilyn, welcome.
Marilyn, your microphone, please.
I thought I had it on, but obviously I didn't. Thank you, Francois. And before we start, just a quick word to let you know that the presentation was recorded. There's a video of it. The presentation was recorded a few weeks ago, and it was subtitled, so that is easier for you to understand. But I'm still live with you today to answer your questions if you have any. And so we will be taking your questions, I and the 2 Colliers workplace experts at the end of the session. Good video for the moment.
Welcome to this presentation of our Actineo International Survey called Workspaces in Major Cities and subtitles Where and How We Will Work in a Post-COVID World. For this survey, this year, we've decided to take a look around a few major metropolitan areas. So we went on a little trip to Paris, to Greater London, to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, to San Francisco, to the San Francisco Bay Area, to Singapore, so that we asked people working there in those major metropolitan areas what their feelings were about their workspaces and the perceptions about the future of their workspaces. As you know, those metropolitan areas are very singular. First of all, for the dynamism, for how huge huge they are. They are really behemoths in terms of population, in terms also of economic development. So we didn't choose them at random. We started with Paris, of course, because we are French, basically. So this was a great point for comparison with the rest of the world. In the Paris area, we have more than 12 million people, and they represent 20% of the French population, so it's very, very huge and very different in terms of sociology there, and in terms of sectors, in terms of how people work there, even in terms of modes of transportation. There's a lot, there are many differences there. Compared to the rest of the country. Same for Greater London and Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, which is quite the Randstad area in the Netherlands. In all those European countries, those metropolitan areas represent a very different sociology and economic point of view from the rest of the country. Then we have the San Francisco Bay Area and Seattle, which is really GAFA land. So it's very different in terms of the rest of the country, also there. And Singapore was the area that we chose for Asia. You know, it's very different also in terms of this country went from a poor economy to a very rich, very dynamic economy. And so we wanted to have the point of view of people working there. What we did in each of these areas was to look at, to survey 600 people. They are currently working there. And then we had a focus on those who are currently working there, but they work in offices. At least occasionally they work in offices. As you know, most of the people in these areas already work in offices anyway. So in the total sample, we had, depending on the areas, around 88 from 94% of all the people that we polled working in offices. We wanted to say a few words before we start presenting the results to you about the survey, the survey sample. First of all, we do not only talk here about younger people. We have, as you see, quite a balance between younger people under 35, let's say. 36% of our sample is under 35. And the older generation, 33% of our sample are over 36 years old. So it's not only about young people. There's also a right balance in genders. We have quite the same repartition of men and women. So the results won't be explained in terms of men say that more than women say that, etc. As for the sector of activity, you see it's overwhelmingly people working in the service sector, although we have all those sectors like public administration, industry, etc. But nearly 43% of the people that we polled work in the service sector, which is absolutely not a surprise, of course. And as to company size, we also wanted to say a word because usually, maybe when we think of workspaces and the design of workspaces, we think of big companies. Here, we've polled a large range of people working from different sized companies. As you see, we have like almost half of the people that we polled worked for companies that are under 250 people, employees in total. And 66% of them work in places, even if the company is larger than that, in the places where they work, on the premises where they work, the total number of employees is under 250. So it's not only about young people, it's not only about people working for large companies. This survey is more far-ranging than that. Also, a few words on differences between areas, because we will point out during the presentation some key differences, major differences between areas. So we'll see Paris, people say that. In the Greater London area, people say that. But we need to keep in mind some differences that we have in our samples before that. Like, for instance, in the Paris area, we noticed that our sample contains more people working full-time and with permanent contracts, for instance, which is a bit different, from the point of view of the people working there, regarding, for instance, satisfaction, regarding the way you control your work involvement, for instance, things like that. Also, in the Paris area, we have more people working for larger companies over 1,000 people, and fewer managers. In the Greater London area, we have more people working in public administration. That may have an impact on the way they look at the way they work. In the Randstad area in the Netherlands, we have more part-time employees. That is also important to point out. We have more younger employees. We have a fair share of people under 25, for instance, and we have more people working in public administration. And you will see that sometimes this area stands out in terms of their perception regarding work and workspaces. And this kind of information that we are putting here might be also key to understanding why. In the San Francisco Bay Area and Seattle, we have more self-employed people. Globally, we'll see that they are more satisfied with their work, and that may be also a reason why there are more self-employed people, there are more managers also, and there are more people working in the service sector. As you know, it's already very present, the service sector, but it's even more present in the San Francisco Bay Area and Seattle. In Singapore, we have more managers also, and we have more people working in the industry sector, which is not a surprise given that area. Our survey addresses key main questions. I mean, it addresses a lot of things, but globally here we're going to talk about three key questions. First of all, what are workspaces like today? What kind of workspaces people work in today? Second, of course, the question that everybody is asking is what has been the impact of the COVID on the way people have been working recently? And the third question is the most important part of this presentation, will be the future. Where and how will we work tomorrow? And of course, the where and the how are very, very much linked together. So first of all, the workspaces today, what are they like? Well, first of all, the answer about, many questions about, is everybody working in flex office? Is everybody working in open offices? Well, the answer is not everybody works in open offices yet. It's half-half from what we see in our sample. The enclosed office is still alive from what we see. As you see, 51% of our sample work in an open office, 49% work in an enclosed office. So it's quite balanced between the two. And if you ask further of people whether they work in an open office, which is with more than 10 people or less than 10 people, it's also a fair balance, because you see it's 26 people working in open spaces, with collective spaces with more than 10 people, 26, and less than 10 people, fewer than 10 people, 25, sorry. And for enclosed offices, it's the same. Is it shared with 2 people, 25? Is it individual, 24? It's also a fair balance. There are a few differences, though, between areas. For instance, in Singapore, and you have more people working in open offices, as also we have, for the large open space, more than 10 people, we have an overrepresentation of people working in the London, Greater London area, and in Singapore. Whereas we also have open offices in the Netherlands, in the Randstad area, but it's more the smaller kind of open space, less than 10 people, that we have an overrepresentation here. Whereas for enclosed offices, we have an overrepresentation in our sample of people working in the San Francisco Bay Area and Seattle, which might come as a surprise, because people may think that it's the land of the flex office. But remember, you have more managers in our sample there. We have also more people working as independent workers, so it's more. This is why they tend to be more in the enclosed office than the open space. And we have also the shared, small, enclosed office, which is more present also in the Netherlands and also in Paris. The individual office being more present in our American sample because of the share of managers that we have here. And there's something that we need to talk about also, is the level of satisfaction that we polled also, that we measured. The level of satisfaction with global quality of life at work is quite linked also to whether you work in an open or a closed office. In open offices, you see that people are less likely to be very satisfied with the quality of life at work, whereas when they work in an enclosed office, they are very much more satisfied to be likely to be very satisfied with the quality of life at work. So in fact, it's not completely linked to the fact that it's open or closed, because it's also linked to the fact that you're more likely to be a manager if you work in an enclosed office, and you're more likely to be satisfied with your work if you're a manager. Still, there is a link between level of satisfaction and the morphology, if you like, of the space that you work in. Second question that we wanted to look at is flex spaces. So they are a reality, not maybe so very much widespread as maybe some of you thought. Globally, in our sample, we have 17% of respondents who do not have an allocated workstation. That is, when they come to work, they choose the place, or maybe take the place that they have still available in order to work. But it's not an allocated workstation. The result shows that it's more likely to be the case in the Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague sample, and very much less likely to be the case for the American and Singapore sample. So this is more a fact for people working in Amsterdam, Rotterdam and The Hague, for instance. It's of course more likely to be something that employees will find in larger companies. So 22% of people working in larger scale companies like 1,000 and more say that they do not have an allocated workstation. And once again, we had a look at work satisfaction, and we see that in fact, their employees are much more likely to be very dissatisfied with the quality of their life at work if they do not have an allocated workstation. So I'm not blaming here the not allocating the flex office per se, but still we need to note a correlation between poor level of satisfaction and the fact that you work in a flex office. Another result is a confirmation that most employees do not always work in the premises of the company already. Of course, we asked people where they worked, and we had several locations. Where do you work? Do you work in your company premises? Do you work at home? Do you work elsewhere? And this is here the result for at least once a month. So at least once a month, we have an overwhelming majority of people working in the company premises or at client's company, which is absolutely normal. We see there's an overrepresentation of people from Paris and London here, so nothing to see here. But what is most important is that 1/3 of employees work elsewhere already. So COVID or no COVID. They work at home, 32% of them work at least for one full day. Well, 19% of them work at least from one full day at home, and especially in Paris and in London. But globally, we have 1/3 of people who occasionally work from home already before COVID, because we asked them to describe the situation before the COVID broke out. And also we have people working elsewhere. It could be in collaborative workspaces, could be in public areas, could be in transportation, like in trains, in planes, things like that. Could be out in gardens, for instance, but at least it's elsewhere. You know, it's called the nomads, sometimes called the digital nomads, because of course the kind of work can be done outside because they are connected with a computer or their smartphones. So work is not already, well, before even the COVID impacted us, we were not always within our company premises, sometimes at home and sometimes elsewhere. And the global satisfaction with the work environment before COVID was quite high, actually. We asked people whether they were satisfied with the places of work. Are they well suited to my needs? And most people say, yes, they're well suited to my needs. Not all people said they're very well suited to my needs, because you see only 29% strongly agree with the statement, my places of work is well suited to my needs. But still, you have people who are fairly satisfied, and also people satisfied that their employers care about their well-being at work. So 81% agree, and 29% strongly agree about that. We have overrepresentation in the States, in San Francisco and Seattle. We have overrepresentation in Singapore. Overrepresentation, of course, among managers, but also overrepresentation among younger people. So it's quite positive to see that younger people think that the workspaces are quite suited to their needs, and also think that their employers are quite open to trying their best to make them work in pleasant conditions. However, we also noted, as you know, those are specific areas in the countries, in each of the countries. Commute time was a very major issue. We have 61% of the people that we polled saying, I spend too much time commuting to and from work, which is a very big percentage, and 24 people, that's 1/4 people saying, I strongly agree. I really have a major issue with my commute time. I spend too much time commuting to and from work. And this is even more terrible, if we may say so, because the people that we polled in those specific major metropolitan areas tend to work after hours. We have 63% of them saying I often work outside my working hours or when I'm on leave, which testify to high work involvement, but also to the fact that it is very difficult to keep a good balance between work and work life and private life. And indeed, the people that we poll say that in their huge majority, we have 79% of the total sample saying, I would like to have a better balance between my work life and my personal life. 30% of them strongly agree with the statement. And they also kind of struggle to do all they can to maintain very clear boundaries between their work and their private life. An overwhelming majority say that. 1/3 of them strongly agree, especially true in the San Francisco Seattle area, in Singapore and in Paris. It is less of a problem, obviously. We will get back to that point because it's very important to see that, well, one of the major issues with working at home might be that problem with maintaining clear boundaries between work and private life. So now let's see what the impact of COVID has been. Well, unsurprisingly, I might say, that work from home exploded with COVID. Pre-COVID, we asked people whether they had worked for at least one full day from home, and the answer was 25% of them had done so. And with COVID, we had a staggering 83% of people who have at least one full day during either lockdown or sanitary crisis anyway, the pandemic, working at least one full day from home. So this is a proper explosion. And we've looked at differences between areas. The larger difference, the larger discrepancy between the number of people, the percentage of people working from home before and after COVID was found in the Greater London area. We had an increase of 69 points in the percentage of people working from home. So it was really huge. So Singapore, also San Francisco Bay Area, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and in Paris is the place where we have the smallest discrepancy between number of people working from home before and after COVID. So in fact, working from home was a habit before COVID started in the Paris area. But it was an occasional habit because we also looked at how many days a week people worked from home. And you see that in Paris, we had and the average number of days worked from home was quite small compared to the other area. So more people working from home, but very occasionally. So it means that it was like maybe 1 day every 2 weeks, let's say, something like that. And so the number of days working from home was, of course, greater during COVID for all of the areas polled, especially, as we saw before, also in Greater London. So the hugest change with COVID in all the areas that we polled was certainly observed in Greater London. Now that we've seen that, so it was the impact of COVID. Now, what is the future of work going to be? How are we likely to work in the future? Well, first of all, we actually asked people what they thought about it. So we at the end of our questionnaire, we asked them, so we've talked a bit about COVID, and you know that with the pandemics, the way we work now, the way many of us work is going to change, has changed already, and might change in the future. What do you think is going to happen? 56% of the people that we polled said things would be a little different. So people were not saying this is going to be a complete change, a complete overhaul of the way we're working. It's not going to be back to completely normal also. So it's going to be a little different. And especially in the Paris area, especially in the Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague area, people are more likely to think that things are going to be slightly different, not entirely different. Only 18% of people think that things are going to be back to normal, to what they were before the pandemic. So that's a very little percentage. But you see there's another representation of people thinking that in the San Francisco Seattle area, probably because they already had ways of working that were very digital, very working remotely from home, from their offices, etc., working a bit everywhere. So for them, the impact that they've perceived is going to be less important. And in the Greater London area, you see here the hugest percentage of people saying things will be completely different. As you see, this is also the area where the COVID impact has been major in the way it has transformed people's places and ways of working. And we asked people different scenarios about the way we might be working tomorrow. Are workplaces going to be more environmentally friendly? Are you going to be more, are people likely to be more working in an independent fashion? Are people likely to be working more from home, etc.? And we asked those scenarios, and for each of the scenarios we asked, do you think it's desirable? Do you think it's likely? And you see here the results of this putting together the results. And you have the vertical axis, which means which indicates how desirable the scenario was thought to be, and the horizontal axis, which indicates how likely people thought the scenario was going to be. So first of all, utopia is what people thought was very desirable, but very unlikely also. So they dismissed it as, okay, I wish it could happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's everyone working from home or in co-working spaces. So everyone not ever going to their company's premises anywhere at any time. Well, people say, well, might be fun, might be nice, but in the end, it's not going to happen. So we'll dismiss that. The other kind of scenario that people dismissed was, well, this is a dystopia. Might be extremely likely, but I certainly do not wish it to happen. It's the kind of scenario in which robots and artificial intelligence replace all human workers, so people don't want that at all. And you have also this proposition that we had, ergonomic connected home offices will be provided by employers for all people, in order for all people to be working from home. And strangely enough, people said, no, we don't want that either. So maybe those of you who are thinking what might be a good business opportunity for us to install connected workstations in people's home, because people are going to be working from home more often. And in fact, people said, no, we don't want that, because the way we presented the scenario was a bit maybe intrusive. And this is the answer of people say, we don't want our employers forcing our homes and forcing the entry to our homes with bringing connected workstation in there. But we will see, we will get back to this point later, we will see that people are open, employees are open to employers contributing to making their home office a better place to work in, but not in a very intrusive, very hands-down way. What people wanted, on the contrary, is in this sector that we underlined as at the same time desirable and what people thought was likely to happen. Well, first of all, people are thinking of a future in which work will be, workspaces will be more sustainable and more inclined to providing well-being to those working there. So the scenario in which companies will give more importance to sustainability, eco-friendliness, first of all, and second, to well-being in workplaces, is a scenario that people think is at the same time desirable, of course, but also likely to happen. So they have this confidence, this trust in that companies will work so that workplaces will be more sustainable and pleasanter, more pleasant places to work in from a well-being point of view. But also, employees foresee there will be more autonomy in the way people work, so less compulsory links, if I may say so, between companies and their employees. There will be a rise of self-employment, multiple contracts. This is what people foresee. So maybe there will be more autonomy in the way you decide how you want to work and also where you want to work. But even if you don't do that, there's another place another scenario that people saw as desirable and likely was that work was going to be much more flexible. It will not be the 9 to 5 kind of work hours or working 5 days a week. Maybe it will be working a lot at the beginning of the week, working a lot during the weekend, but not working one day during the week. Things like that people think are likely to happen and also desirable. So more flexibility as well as more autonomy in the way you work. And also, the last one, workers and companies will leave big cities. The fact that more and more the possibility to work remotely from company premises has been, is not only possible with digital tools, but also because sometimes employees were against working, letting their employees working from home. But with the sanitary crisis, suddenly it has been made possible, and more people who did not work before from home, or remotely at least, have discovered that it was possible, even in the kind of work that they did, to do so. Has led people to really think that workers and company might be moving away from even those huge metropolitan areas that we've been polling to go, for instance, in the country and working far away from those city centers and seek different places in which to live and work together.
Hi, we are waiting for Marilyn. Kate is here, and we'll have a little chit-chat between Marilyn and Kate. Kate, I don't know where Marilyn is, but perhaps you can introduce the point. This is Marilyn. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thinking of these scenarios, this is what people say, but we would like also to know how you, as experts of the workplace, react. So we are lucky enough to have here with us Kate North, who is a workspace strategist from Colliers, and she also is someone who's specialist of the United States. So Kate, could you share your thoughts on these scenarios and what they mean, in your opinion, for the United States? And also, do you think there might be a difference between what we see here in people's responses from the West Coast, as might there be a difference between what we see here from the West Coast and what might be the answers from the East Coast, do you think?
Absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And I just want to commend this extensive research that they've provided for us. This is a very complex topic, as we know, and going global makes it much more richer, but it also makes it more complex. So thank you very much for the good research that you've done and the opportunity to share some ideas with you today from a US perspective. That first of all, I was delighted to see that environmental friendly workplaces was at the top of the desirable. This has not been the reality. We're seeing from a younger generation, certainly from the generation Y and Z, that this is becoming more important. And one of the things that's starting to play out with this whole COVID return to office and really rethinking work and workplace is that many of the decisions are being created to be able to to allow for the organizations to be at a competitive advantage to attract talent. And so in the past, where perhaps they would give a nod towards environment, I think more and more are recognizing that as we return, how do we really leverage this as a catalyst to really attract better talent? So sustainability is an important component for us. And it will be great to see if we actually see organizations putting money towards this. In the past, in doing a lot of client work, when working with leaders and asking them, these different sets of criteria, what's most important, environmental has been at the bottom. So I'm hoping that we see a higher deployment of expenditures towards that. I loved also seeing the well-being piece up high as well. I think that we all come back to the office with a greater sense of understanding how important our health is and our well-being. And when we think of well-being, there's certainly the physical element of wanting to feel good and safe. I think people are very aware and astute now of air quality and are demanding to have dashboards and understanding of those different functions. But we are also looking at well-being as something so much richer than just the physicality of it. It's looking at that ability to be connected, to do purposeful work, to feel engaged and have it really support our work-life balance. And so for organizations that are thinking through those things, what we've seen as a global trend within IFMA, International Facility Management Association, and this Workplace Evolutionary, it's a community of practice. It's the largest workplace community of practice in the world. What we've seen is a major shift in order for that to occur, that the real estate and facilities teams are working hand in glove with their HR and their digital partners, as well as leadership and risk, et cetera. So it will require that holistic group of people thinking through what well-being means to an organization. Now, in looking at the rise of self-employment, that has been a dream and a desire. It's been part of the American dream, but unfortunately, because of our healthcare system, many people that would choose to be self-employed can't manage the cost of healthcare and some of those other more governance. It's been around 6% in the US, and in talking to experts really that have been studying this, we don't see it as something that will happen quickly unless we can really think about different types of social agreements and governance around them. Flex hours? Yes, I think we want flex everything. Now that we've had a taste of choice, we want to be able to craft our lives, craft our work. We're seeing this absolutely. Yan Yap and I had the pleasure of doing some research right when COVID struck, and we tracked it again in September to see if there were any changes. You know, did people get tired? Or for those that had children were schooling at home, were they exhausted and wanted to think differently about working from home? And instead, we continue to see it rise. It's around 70% of the people in the US would like to be able to work from home at least 2+ days a week and continue to do so. And many organizations are now in the process of developing strategies that will be dramatically different than what they left. You know, these are going to be more remote first or remote friendly, sometimes known as hybrid strategies. So we see this happening. But at the same time, we also recognize that everybody's been working longer hours and that people are exhausted, and that certainly will continue to impact our overarching well-being. And so for organizations to think deeply about how they manage through that process, how do they set good examples and frameworks and guidelines that perhaps contain a boundary so that people can feel like that they can truly have the flexibility they desire, but without the need to be online more or to be able to working more. And then I think also the piece around workers leaving big cities. You know, I've done that myself. I was in Chicago and I've just recently moved to Utah. And we certainly see our clients on, you know, and those larger companies in high cost areas like New York and in San Francisco. The employee said, why would I be working remotely and in a very expensive apartment or home when I could have a lifestyle and be skiing with Kate? So I think many of them, unbeknownst to their HR leaders, just took the initiative and have started to relocate to different areas. And I think that's why we see so many of the tech companies specifically opening up and saying, yes, you can work anywhere, and really trying to define what that would mean, knowing that people still will want the ability to be together. Will it be hubs that will be more flex spaces? You know, that certainly is something to consider. There are also lots of issues from taxation perspective of an employee leaving one state and migrating to another. So it's complex, it will take time, but I think for many of the organizations, as again, they think about where they're going in the future, a new set of skills, a new talent, that if they can begin to create strategies that allows for them to hire, engage, connect with that talent, regardless of where they work, they believe it could be a competitive advantage. So those are some of the things that I see in your top right-hand quadrant, Marilyn.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much.
So this is globally the scenario that people foresee. But now if we look more closely at what is going to happen, what kind of work experience will people expect in the future? First of all, what kind of working space would employees like? We've looked at the beginning of this presentation at where people were working, whether they were working in enclosed offices, whether they were working in open spaces, and whether they liked it or not. And when we asked people what kind of places they would want to work, possibly in the premises of the companies, well, it's very obvious that the three top scores, if you put together the first and the second choice, it's always a dedicated workstation. It's hardly ever a flex office, hardly ever no dedicated workstation. And the first thing is people would like to work in an enclosed individual office. 50% of the people that we polled answered that. Or a dedicated workstation, yes, in a small shared office. So you see that even in those major metropolitan areas where for years already, people have been talking about, big open spaces, collaborative spaces. You see that employees still think that the best place for them to work would be an individual office or a shared office, but at least something that is enclosed, not open. Or at least it would be a third choice, dedicated workstation always, open workspace, okay, we're open to that, but at least they would have to be with private areas and meeting rooms so that you could absolutely choose whether you wanted to be in areas in which you could work alone and concentrate, and have the ability, of course, also to be in meeting rooms, to work with your colleagues or be collaborative. So first of all, and we'll get back to the point, what people seek from their workspaces is a place where they could do their own work, not always be in collaboration with others. And you see that there is an overwhelming proportion of people saying that in the San Francisco Seattle area, in the Paris area. So you might say, yeah, Paris people are more conservative. Also, we saw that they're more into administrative work, not managers, etc. And they share this opinion that working in an enclosed office is better with the people from San Francisco and Seattle, which are, as we saw, more likely to be managers, more likely to be independent workers, more likely to be in the service area, so more likely to be in these digital sectors. So those people who are very different in terms of sociology still share this opinion that they would like to work in this enclosed office with, of course, a dedicated workstation. The second thing is working from home will be a major expectation. You have here 85% of respondents would like to work from home for at least one full day. Whether we still have the COVID problem or not, that is not the question. It's really, even when the pandemic is over, they would like to work from home at least one full day. And even those who have never worked from home before say, in their overwhelming majority, 83% of them say that, they would like to work from home, even if it has not been possible so far. So really, it is going to be a major thing after COVID. People will want to either continue or start working from home more. And working from home, we also ask people, do you think your company would be in favor of that? And in fact, most people said, yes, I think my company would look positively on me asking to work from home. And only 24% strongly agree with that, but overall, most people say, yeah, well, my company would not be completely closed to me working from home. The question, of course, would be how many days? And we have here the answer very clearly. Most people say that on an average, they would like to work from about 2-3 days per week from home. So it's not only one day. It's not the full week, although 14% of people say yeah, all week. And also we have 24% of people saying what kind of ideal workplace would be your ideal workplace. And, you know, they had the choice between an allocated workstation in an enclosed office, things like that we saw before. And 25% of people said, well, I would like to work from home 100% of my working time. So you see, there are already a very huge proportion of people saying, well, yeah, I could be working from home. I don't need to come to the office every day, or not at all, in fact. But overall, most of the people say, well, the ideal time would be half the week, let's say 2 or 3 days a week. With half the week, it means that, the premises of the company and home would be half-half in sharing people's time at work. So what could prevent working from home? Well, first of all, for those who said, I suppose my company would not be entirely in favor of it. So most of the obstacles that people foresee is that, well, maybe the company would not be in favor of it. 29% of people say that, especially in Paris, especially in Singapore, especially if you're an administrative employee. So people thought that maybe I won't be allowed to do so. Also, 26% of people said might be not super practical for my work. It would require a lot of adjustments, maybe. Also, we have personal reasons, you have maybe social reasons, people saying, well, it's not maybe a good idea because my colleagues would frown upon my not coming to the office every day, etc. Also, people say, no reason, I never thought about it, but now maybe I will start thinking about it. And another reason was equipment. So when you work in workspaces design and think what people are starting to work a lot from offices, do they have the right kind of equipment? Well, equipment could be, because I don't have the right kind of equipment, could be an obstacle to working from home. But we have also asked people, what do you think of the equipment that you have to work at home? And we will give you the answer in a next slide. But today, well, most people say, I'd like to go to work from home most of my week, in fact, half my week. So the question is, why still go to the office? Well, mostly, as we see here, mostly for socializing, because the first thing that we see in the answer here, well, in my opinion, going to the office rather than working from home would allow me to, well, have informal chats and pleasant moments with colleagues. So it's not only about better working together, because working together can be done through digital tools very easily, in fact, through video conferences and things like that. But informal chats, having a coffee together, even if we don't have work matters to discuss, is something that people have been missing very much during lockdown. And so this is the first reason that they thought of about going to the office, and especially in Paris, as you see, Paris, where we have a huge culture of conviviality, of sharing a cup of coffee at the office. And most people in Paris said, yes, it's very important. But also a dedicated work area, which might be clearly separate from my private life, is the second thing that people wanted. We saw at the beginning of the presentation that most of the people working in these huge metropolitan areas struggle to keep a good balance between their work life and their private life. They say, I'm trying my best to make a clear cut between my work life and my private life, and sometimes it's not very easy. Well, the office would have this function of keeping work and private life separated, which is not the case, of course, when you work in your own living room, and sometimes you don't have time for anything else. And this is people have been complaining about, staying, in fact, working more because they are there, they don't have to travel to work, and so they, in fact, find it more difficult to make a clear cut between resting time and working time.
So we will have the introduction of Yanyap by Marilyn.
Yes, absolutely. So the question of why do we still have to go or would like to go to the office? What is the reason for going to the office? Actually, when we were designing the questionnaire with the team, we had fun thinking about that, because we were thinking, well, we can do everything from home. Why go to the office? So we had this set of questions. So at this point, it would be extremely useful for us to hear your opinion, Yanyap, as someone who designs workspaces and makes them work for productivity, for well-being. What do you think of these answers?
Why?
It would seem that you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
I can't really hear you,
Perhaps while Yanyap is working on his audio, I can share that from the Colliers research that we did earlier this year that I had referred to, is that we found without a doubt that the reason why people wanted to come into the office was to connect. And some of that may have been more social. So, having a coffee or being able to bump into somebody and build relationships. We also found that, those things that were difficult to do online, like complex collaboration, the ability to kind of work shoulder by shoulder and on a whiteboard, or, really engage with one another. And then, certainly the ability to just have that amazing opportunity to be together, feel the culture, bump into different leaders, build your acumen around what's going on in the organization, and perhaps even, break up your week, have that separation, Marilyn, that you talked about, is that the desire just to, structure your week slightly differently so that, the things that perhaps were really awful, like a commute, became a valued space to get your head together. So
Absolutely.
those were a couple.
Best part of the day, when you get home. Yeah.
Can you hear me now, Marilyn? Yes, does it work? Apologies, I have some technology issues. Okay, good. So just following up on what Kate said as well. So the most organizations that we are working with at the moment, of course, the key question is what's the role of the office and why do people come to the office in the future? And the main thing, and I think that's really consistent in a lot of research and a lot of studies as well, is people miss the social element of being together, and people miss collaborating in person. People miss like sharing ideas and something that we often call serendipity. So the unlikelihood that you touch into someone unexpected, which often leads to new interactions, new collaborations, and new ideas. And we see most organizations and a lot of companies we are working with at the moment saying that is the key role of the office to facilitate that. But I think also aligned with your point earlier, we see most organizations we are working with at the moment still wanting to facilitate individual work as well. So one hand, collaboration is important, and there's definitely a move towards facilitating more collaborative settings in offices. But on the other hand, work is also often a blend of different activities. So people collaborate, and maybe in between collaboration wants to do some individual work as well. Or as mentioned before, not everyone has the opportunity to work productive from home. So also people who live in smaller apartments or do not have enclosed rooms might want to come to the office to do focused work as well. So in a lot of office transformations where we are currently working on, we definitely increase the number of collaborative settings and sort of redefine the workstation to become more of a collaboration space and more team space. But on the other hand, still facilitate individual work by having libraries in offices, enclosed rooms in offices for people to do individual work as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And in fact, the third place also could be the link between office and home. Now we have the premises of the company where people work would be, let's say, half the week, ideally. Half the week would be at home. But then we have this problem about how do we separate the work environment from the private sphere. And we ask people, maybe it would be a good idea to have this third place nearby where you could work. It could be shared offices, co-working spaces, Fab Lab, etc. And people said, yes, that might be a very good idea. In fact, 55% of the people that we polled said, yeah, it could be a good idea. So not only from home, not always in the office, but somewhere in between where we could have all the right tools to work, but also not be always in the privacy of my own home. So in the end, what we see coming out from this survey is now that we have all these results. Companies working on workspaces have to rethink the global company employee experience, the global working experience for their employees, which will be shared between company premises and the home, quite half-half. And between that, the third places would have a very big role to play as the missing link between the two. And if we look at company premises and homes, what is the work experience today? Well, at home, we've asked people, of course, it's very nice to be able to work in your underwear, as the gentleman in this presentation is doing. We asked people, are you satisfied with the level of quality that you have regarding your equipment that you have to work at home, regarding the quality of life, regarding your efficiency, and overall people were quite satisfied. You know, it's 7.5 or 7.6 out of 10, so a very good satisfaction overall, but it could be better. And it could be better in many ways. For instance, the company could help provide a better home office experience. And when we asked people whether they would like that, remember we had in the future scenario, please do not come intruding into my home with your connected workstation. Don't do that, but maybe, yeah, help me set up my home office at home on my own terms. 74% of the people that we polled said, yes, I would like my employer to participate. How would they like the employer to participate? They would like to have more choice. You know, most people would say, I'd like to have free choice of my equipment, but my employer could make a financial contribution. Of course, I would then send out the receipts to prove that I've actually bought an ergonomic seat and a better lighting for my office, but I would like to have the choice. Then we have 20% of people saying, well, you could provide a customized workstation, or you could, it's about the same percentage, 19, fully finance the equipment. But you see that the majority of people think, yeah, it would be better if you let me have the choice of it and then make a financial contribution. And of course, you have also 15% of people saying, okay, I've already got what I need. Also 12% of people saying, no, okay, I'll set my workstation myself, thank you. I don't need help from any quarter. So in fact, we have all these reflections about the ideal workspace. You know, we've looked at what people wanted in terms of whether it's an enclosed or open space office, why they would come to the office, etc. From all this information, and also from asking directly people what would constitute for them, what would make up the quality workspace, we have designed this pyramid of what people expect. And we have separated this pyramid in must-haves, so what you absolutely must contribute to the working experience of your employees so that they will be satisfied, and then differentiators that you can add once you have done the must-haves. Well, the first thing that people actually want from a working space is individual concentration. So no wonder that people would prefer to work in an enclosed space. No wonder that they prefer to, have specific places so that they can do their own work. This is the first thing that they expect. In fact, most employees think that work is mostly about collaboration, working with other people, but employees beg to differ. The first thing about work for them is individual concentration. This is absolutely what they need to have. Second, well-being is an important thing, of course. So in well-being, we've pulled together things like, having very good hygiene, which is even more important after the sanitary crisis, after the pandemic, having a connection with nature, having places to relax. That's the second important thing. And at the same level, things for teamwork. So teamwork and well-being are very important, but kind of on the same level as together, and somehow less important than the very first expectation, which is a place to be to have the possibility to concentrate on my own work and do my own work first of all. And then once you have settled that is enough places to relax, to be concentrated, to do your work in a calm manner, that the well-being of your employees is well assured, that the teamwork can be smooth and be there, then you can start thinking of differentiators. First of all, a very important thing, as we saw also in the future scenarios that people expect and think are very desirable, sustainability is going to be something very important in designing workplaces for the future. This is a major expectation. Creativity, in especially the areas that we polled, you know that they are the leading edge of flexible ways of working, also reinventing the way that people work, being creative in your everyday work. And it is also part of something that people expect as a differentiator. Workspaces that stimulate creativity might be individual, might be collective creativity, but very important. And then at the very top of the pyramid, we have all things connected with experience. It has to do with design, it has to do with decor that might be at the same time meaningful and scalable. In the items that we tested, we have things like, a way of designing the space that might reflect the company culture and values. Also, personalization in the way that spaces are decorated or can be designed. For instance, different spaces that might accommodate the needs of specific crafts within one company, specific departments within one company. And taking that into account would be very important. And then also, of course, the more playful, recreational aspects of design, which are also part of the experience and which are more, unsurprisingly, appreciated by the younger part of the population. Now, maybe looking at this pyramid, you're thinking, well, if my job is to make great design places, to design great places to work, and you're saying that the experience and the decor and the design is just the top of the pyramid, but it's not the very bottom of it, not the very most important, well, be reassured that, in fact, design is super important. It has to be designed with a meaning, of course, not only design that is nice to look at, but workspace design really does matter. And when we ask people, what do you think about the statement, I place great importance on the design and decoration of the places where I work, you had 70% of people saying, yeah, I agree. I place great importance on the design and decoration of the places where I work. It's only 22% of strongly agree, but still 22% is very important. And you see it's even more important among people working in a San Francisco, Seattle area, among managers, which means that it's not only for them, but also for the good spirit of the team. And among younger people also it was very, very important. So in the end, designing a great working experience will matter and be very, very important for everyone, and ensure that the work experience is the greatest for all. So now it's your turn to turn those insights into great workspaces. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you everyone for all your interesting questions in the chat. To start, we have a simple and global one for Marilyn. Does working from home choice has changed after COVID?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The proportion, the number of people working from home changed dramatically before and after COVID. We went from 21% of people working from home to 83% of people working at least occasionally from home. So yeah, that was a tremendous impact.
Yeah, but I think this question is more about not the number, but the choice.
Could you be more specific?
Yeah, I think it's maybe Jean-Paul, you ask the question in the chat. Can you tell me more detail to be clearer for Marilyn, please?
And we could take another question.
Yes, we will take another question. And Jean-Paul, tell me more about it in the chat, and I will ask to Marilyn later. Thank you.
So we have another question for our experts, Yanyap and Kate. How do you explain that people seem satisfied of their workplace, while a large part of this workplace are empty between 30% to 50% of the opening time? What do you think?
I think interesting to see also pre-COVID, the average occupancy across Europe was about 50%. So that was already quite low. Of course, post-COVID, if people will work, the numbers that we saw in the presentation, about 2 to 3 days a week from the office, 2 to 3 days a week remotely, it is expected to further drop. On the other hand, we see that there is a desire in the data for people to have sort of a dedicated workspace. If organizations provide people with dedicated workspaces, the average occupancy will be even lower than 50% and maybe even go to 20 or even 10% on average. So what we see with many organizations, what we're currently discussing with many organizations, how can we create on one hand still this feeling of belonging for people and ensure that teams can sit together in the office, which is a really important requirement. But on the other hand, also not have an oversupply of space and having an office that is half empty or even worse the majority of the time, because that's also not efficient and also from a sustainability point of view, not desired. So we see many organizations developing strategies for this by having sort of team areas and team zones where teams can work to ensure that teams can sit together. Have sort of a form of scheduling in place so that the right teams can come together on the right days. But of course, there's a thin line between that because you don't want to be too prescriptive because you take out the creativity and the collaboration. On the other hand, it might be smart to have something in place in order to be able to manage peaks in occupancy. So it's a complex question. It's a complex challenge that many organizations are facing. And what's the right balance? On the one hand, having dedicated spaces, dedicated areas for teams, but on the other hand, having not an oversupply of space and too much office space.
Yeah, I would agree with you. A couple of things I think that are interesting is that certainly in some additional research that's come out through Leesman, and we're doing it as well through our independent studies, is when asking people how they would rate their home office versus their workplace, that the home office is notoriously getting a higher ranking than that of the office. So you think about it, trying to attract people back into the office. I think it helps us all think that we've got to take what we've learned over the past year around what people love about working from home and bring that more into the workplace. So the things that we've loved is the ability to control our environment more so at home. And I think that speaks to the bottom tier of what's most important, having that foundation of being able to concentrate and to control the environment. In the US, I think that's why this notion of being in an open environment is just not acceptable anymore. The density, I don't think we'll ever see that again. I think clearly moving into activity-based settings that allows for people to find, when they do come in the office, the kind of space that supports that anticipated experience. So in the US, we're switching definitely from individual spaces and even fewer assigned environments and moving them more into collaborative, more social, dedicated spaces. And that, you know, if you're coming into the office just to check emails, yes, there may be a space, but if you're really going to go there to focus or to concentrate and try to do work, that may be better done at home. It will be an individual component to that. So I think part of it is, again, thinking about what is the purpose of place, what will people be doing, and right-sizing that so that it is going to be in scale with the energy and the density that you're wanting to achieve. I think there's also this piece around, in the US, we're looking at the short term, you know, between July now and the end of the year, when people are slowly returning, what are the things that we need to accommodate? Less density, typically around 10 to 20% is what most organizations that are going to be moving back by September are thinking. And then thinking further, what's going to be then the strategy once we are, you know, perhaps vaccinated or there's herd immunity and it feels safer for people to achieve. So I think that the space also needs to be reflected based upon individual, I know in the US, it's state by state guidelines that will ensure that it's going to be safe.
Another question, do the creation of third places and co-working places will be increased in the small and middle cities, or is it a trend more dedicated to big cities only?
An interesting point. I see first a little bit of sidestep, but I see like the purpose of co-working spaces changing. So pre-COVID, a lot of co-working spaces and third offices were used pure as like community space, as collaboration spaces. What we see now is that a lot of co-working spaces are transforming to facilitate individual work more. So for example, people who cannot work productive from home because they don't have the right setup or they don't have the right space, that they can go to a co-working space in close proximity to do focused work there. Or even collaborations with public libraries, with hotels. There are a lot of new initiatives popping up at the moment. So that's the purpose changing. And what we see is that it's getting more dispersed and more separated instead of having everything in city centers. We see on one hand the potential move outside of the cities, as we mentioned before. So we see also co-working spaces following that trend, being in closer proximity to where people live. However, we still see it present in city centers as well. So we expect it will be more divided over areas and over regions.
In the US, one of the things that we're starting to see that has shifted, I think, Yanyap, to your point, is that as organizations want to reduce the commute time for their employees, they're doing studies to identify where do the employees live and is there a hub that that would have a co-working location that may not be a leased facility for that organization, but it would allow for members of that company to work together at a co-working or a flex space scenario. So I think that many of those organizations are really vamping up to think not about just housing individuals, but more teams that could come in. And then how do you brand? And then you have to also address all the issues around security and some of those things as well.
I have a question, interesting question about open space and flex office. Can we consider that feedback about demand for individual and dedicated workspaces is more in reaction against open space than an opposition for flex office?
I think there are different types of open spaces. What I see across Europe is that like the large open spaces with more than 16, 24, or even like 32 desks in rows, that there's a strong resistance against that, and that it might be too disturbing for people to work from. So what we see is a trend towards more sort of subdivided open space, meaning that it's still transparent and semi-open, and that you have sidelines and you can see other teams and you can easily connect. But it's not as disturbing as having like a large or a huge open space. In addition to that, we see an increase in enclosed settings, in smaller enclosed settings, not always necessarily dedicated to a person, but accessible for everyone and potentially bookable, also to facilitate hybrid meetings and an increase in virtual meetings. In the UK at the moment, people start slowly going back to the office. And the key challenge that we see in a lot of offices is that everyone is still in calls and in video calls. So it can be really disturbing in open space when everyone is in those calls. So we see within a lot of workplaces at the moment that those smaller enclosed rooms to facilitate hybrid meetings where half of the team is in the office and half the team works remotely, or where you do individual meetings like we're doing today where everyone joins virtually, can be facilitated and accommodated. So I see it more as a move towards more subdivided open spaces, still transparent and open, but less as it was in the past, plus more smaller enclosed rooms to facilitate these meetings.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of discussion on this whole notion of a hybrid meeting and how do you take those spaces and ensure with the right type of technology and behaviors that you are really not setting up yourself for failure. We've all been used to being able to see everybody kind of equally in the same size box. And many of the meeting rooms, you may have a camera, but maybe you don't have great microphone or audio, so you won't know who's speaking. Can you give equal time to those that may be connecting virtually? And there's a lot of new technologies that are coming out that support the smaller meeting rooms. I think what we're starting to see is that there's definitely a desire to have one screen that would be dedicated to who's on the call and being able to have the visual of them. And then the second screen would be more around sharing content and information. But in the spirit of inclusivity, which is really important in the US, given all the social unrest that we've gone through, many organizations are really stepping back and saying, what are the protocols? What are the behaviors? If not everybody's going to be able to be face-to-face, does everybody go and take their call on their own computer? So I think these team norms are going to be an important part of establishing good guidelines that ensure success.
Another question, when people ask for more sustainable workspace, what do they have in mind? Have you some examples?
Yes, I think there are on one hand a lot of examples related to like emissions and carbon emissions, etc. The materials being used. I think a really important thing that's often underestimated is right sizing the office, because you can have a really sustainable office, but when the occupancy is only 20 or 30%, at the end it's not sustainable. So it's really like integrating everything from how the office is being used, of how people travel to the office, how they commute, to the interior of the office, to the occupancy levels.
In the US, we're seeing definitely kind of a migration or an additional interest around well buildings or smart buildings, versus older ones. I think some of that may stem from the air quality, but much of it is also tied to being in an environment in a building that is smart, that is going to be, cost effective to run and to operate. I think those are some pieces that are also part, in addition to what Yanyap said, is that the greenest building is the one that isn't there, right? So we just really want to be able to maximize the utilization of these spaces and do them well. And we've got enough information right now, and the built environment plays such a role around sustainability. How do we make those right choices as we think through the return?
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Kate, on like well-being. It's a combination, I think, of sustainability and well-being. And in a lot of projects and a lot of organizations have the ambition that people should leave the office healthier compared to when they arrive. Looking to the whole integrated experience from food and beverages, from how people do meetings, whether they need a meeting room or whether you do like meeting walks, for example, outside of the office. There are a lot of innovative initiatives and very increased attention to well-being.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's been interesting just to kind of watch is that pre-COVID, we had started to see that there was more emphasis around the well-being. We started seeing more wellness centers and, spaces for respite where you could just, quiet room or reflect, meditate, some of those kinds of things. But I think now, given the anxiety that people have around returning, those spaces to restore and to step away and to gather yourself may also become, really important. And also being able to provide that level of calm, perhaps that may not be in, a high vibe environment, but I think being, realizing that those are spaces are going to be equally important to us as well.
We have a lot of questions. I'm sorry, but we will stop soon. But have another, maybe a last question. Do you have an idea of the future of proportion between individual and collective spaces? Maybe Kate or Yanyap?
So the question was productive spaces versus collaboration or private spaces. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we're seeing a switch as we start to kind of think about this return to office. I think, first of all, what we've seen over these many months is that initially people were planning and designing and thinking what this needs to be when people return. And I think what we're taking on in the US is more of a spirit of agile methodology, like let's gather our data. Let's create the types of environments that we think will support what people want to do when they're there. And what we know from science that's going to be deeply important around building into the design with the technology. You cannot forget the technology component of it. And so I think we see a slow phase. Many are trying to do with what they've got initially. And then as they learn and capture this data, they'll make more changes. There is definitely also consolidation happening for organizations and trying to get the building now designed to support a number of different types of teams if they've consolidated different parts of their organization into one building. And that just requires a deeper analysis around the type of work that they do and settings. Activity-based settings, I think, will be our friend. It has been for a number of years, but it's probably more of that. But we're starting to see, some of the ratios towards individual being as low as, 30 to 40%, and the rest of it, more towards collaboration, team meetings, social areas, some of those things.
Yeah, I agree with Kate. It's I think there will be like a period of trial and error when companies start going back. We're also developing a lot of pilot spaces for organizations where we have a certain starting point and let people come back, test it, collect all the feedback and the learnings, and then use those learnings to further update and improve. I think it's too early to draw final conclusions. However, we get the first direction on all the data that's being collected at the moment. I think one final thing is it also highly depends, of course, on the business. So we're working with a lot of technology companies, with engineering teams who have different demands compared to sales teams or to financial organizations. So it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think it's really important to look closely to your own business, to the working patterns of the people, and create something that suits to them. Also, we see also differences in generations, but we saw some of the data as well, that younger people show a slightly stronger desire to come back to the office, and also potentially wanting to do more individual work in the office compared to older generations. So I think really interesting to look at that as well and what it means for the actual mix of settings. But I agree, we see it moving more towards collaboration, but whether it's like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, I think we'll find out in the next period.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the other thing that we've not shared just real quickly is just the importance of the space for learning and mentoring. I think that the younger generation has desired to be back in because they didn't have the work experience and they look to others to learn from. And so think deeply about the types of environments that you're creating that have that higher level of transparency, or spaces for mentoring or side-by-side learning. Adjacencies will be extremely important going forward too.
Unfortunately, we have to stop for today, but it's been fascinating, and really thank you everyone for attending the conference. And we hope that you found this presentation informative and full of insights that we can all use. Thank you, Marilyn, for a great research study. Thank you, Kate and Yanya, for your expertise. As mentioned at the beginning, the presentation is now on the actineo.fr website, and the recording will also be available from tomorrow. And don't hesitate to keep asking your questions. We'll try to come back to you offline, of course. Thank you so much, and to another time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.